Welcome guys, in this video we're going to talk about polymorphism. Okay, so crank up Visual Studio. Polymorphism, together with encapsulation and inheritance, are things that you must absolutely know in the world of object-oriented programming. So the word polymorphism simply means having several different forms. So crank up Visual Studio and let's see how this looks in code. So using system here, using system.collections.generic. Now we're going to say here public class shape, and let's say private string name, public shape, that's the constructor for the class, string shape name. Let's set them, so this.name equals shape name, and you can also print a message, so console.writeLine, and you can say I am a shape. Close out with a semicolon. Okay, so there's a constructor for the class. Now, inside one virtual method, so you're going to say here public virtual void and then draw. Okay, so we're going to draw some shapes. Now within the body of draw, and say console.writeLine and then performing base class drawing tasks. Okay, if we had such tasks, this would be the place to take care of them. Okay, now next we're going to make a circle class and make it derive from the shape class. Okay, so class circle derives from shape, like that. Now we're going to say here public circle and then string and am, but call the base class constructor, so base NAM, and then you can open and close the braces like that. Okay, this will just call the base class constructor. However, what we are going to do is implement or override the drawing method. So public override void and draw. Okay, now by default it tries to call base.draw, but in our case we're going to just say drawing a circle. Okay, so console WriteLine and then we're drawing a circle, close out the semicolon. Alright, let's add one of the braces here. Seems to have disappeared. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to make another class still. Right now we have a circle. Let me delete this code here. Now let's add a square. So class square and inherits from shape. So because it's inheriting from it, it is a kind of shape. And then you're going to add the constructor, so public square and again string NAM, and then call the base class constructor. Open close braces, and let's implement our own version of draw. So public override void and draw. And again, by default, it will try to call the base class draw, but we'll just say here console.writeLine and drawing a square. Close out with a semicolon. Okay. Let's delete this. At the next stage, we're going to type here class program like this, and then static void main. Then the body of main, now we're going to place some code. So we're going to type here a list, as we've seen before. Okay, this time it's going to be a list of shapes like this, and then new shapes equals a new list. The type, of course, will be shapes, so shape, close out with a semicolon. So this is a list of shapes. Now let's add some, so new shapes that add, and let's add here, let's see, a new circle like that, close out the semicolon. Now remember, this list as we are defining it is designed to store objects of type shape, but because a circle is a kind of shape, you can also add shapes of type circle, okay, to the list. Okay, so this is what I've done here. Let's give it some name. Here's circle. Okay, and now let's see new shapes that add, and then new circle, and then here you go. I'm sorry, you already have one, so let's do a square. Once it's done, give it a name square. Close that with a semicolon. Okay, so now we're adding to the shapes list a new square. Alright, so this would be an example of polymorphism, because you see this list expects shapes, but when you run the code, it will actually accept circles and squares. So those circles and squares will be seen, will assume the form of shapes rather than circles or squares. See, so that's an example of polymorphism. There you go, having many forms. Okay, so circle, square, but also a shape. Alright, now let's take a look at another example here. So you're going to say here, for each, notice now I'm going to say shape S and new shapes, like this. Now, it is a shape, but we're going to call the draw method, and now, in this particular case, when we call the draw method on each shape within the list, it will turn out that the system is smart enough to call the correct draw either for the circle or the square. So this is another example of polymorphism, because even though we created these new circle, new square, and we put them inside the shapes list, when we call draw, they'll assume the form back of being circles and squares, and the correct function from the shape class here, circle or square, will be called. So s.draw goes out with a semicolon. Let's delete this here. Alright, that's that. I pressed that button by accident. Alright, so that's this. Okay, so let's give it a build, make sure everything takes. Okay, let's go debug again. Step into, let's look at this very carefully now. So first, here we are. We're going to make a list of shapes. But now into the shape, the circle that's being added will become a shape. See this? And we call the base class constructor. See that? Then we're going to add a square. But here it's assuming the form of a shape. So we can call it the base class constructor, you see? Now, look very carefully. For each shape S in the new shapes collection, or list, take a look at what will happen. We're going to take S. If you have your mouse over it, it provides, it tells you, see? So this thing is smart enough to know which one to call correctly. See, it calls the circle one. And for the next object, it's going to call the square one. You see that? And that's it. So let's unload this from memory. So what you've just seen is polymorphism of two different forms. Polymorphism is a subtle kind of concept. But remember here the fact that we had this list of shapes and we added circles and squares meant that these circles and squares can essentially be treated like shapes and then go into the shapes list. On the other hand, for each shape S, a new shape and new shapes in that list, when you call draw, the system is smart enough to resolve the correct version of draw, meaning it's able to tell whether the draw from the circle class should be called or the draw from the square class should be called. It doesn't call the default public virtual void draw. Okay? In other words, this S, this shape here, then assumes the more concrete form of either a circle or a square. Okay, and it's properly resolved then in terms of the function that is called. Alright, and that is it. So, thanks very much, and I'll see you in another video.